What exactly is a DRS? Well, it stands for Damage Rider Source, but what does that actually mean? First, we need to establish what is a generic damage rider and what is a generic damage source. In this example, we hit the cash card with a normal weapon attack, which is acting as a damage source. We can then see the Callous Glow Ring, which is a generic damage rider, adding 2 more radiant damage to our damage source. Just to clarify, the generic damage rider in this instance is going to be proccing on all sources, not just attacks and spells. This is going to be important later on. Now, if we were to do another attack on a target with Hex on them, we see a similar combat log, where our attack, which is the initial damage source, has Hex and Callous Glow riding on it. So in this example, everything is working as intended, so far so good. Let's now consider a different example. Here, we throw our javelin once, but in our combat log, we see 2 different instances of our regular damage rider, the Callous Glow Ring. What you're seeing here is the most primitive example of a DRS in action. In this case, Tavern Brawler, which is right over here, is acting as both a damage rider and a damage source. To be a bit more specific, Tavern Brawler is riding on our initial damage source, which was the throw. But at the same time, Callous Glow Ring is riding on it. So in essence, it's acting as a damage rider and a damage source at the same time, hence the name Damage Rider Source, or DRS. We can add in another generic damage rider, the Ring of Flinging, and see a similar effect, but this time it's a bit more pronounced because you have 2 different sets of damage riders, both the Ring of Flinging and the Callous Glow Ring are applying to both of our damage sources, Tavern Brawler and the original attack. Now, when you're only dealing with a single instance of DRS, it's pretty easy to keep track of what's happening. So in the previous example, when we only had Tavern Brawler, you could pretty easily tell where the damage riders were coming from and what the damage sources were. The problem is, if you add in a bunch of sources and a bunch of riders, things start to get messy very, very quickly. For example, let's add Hunter's Mark into the mix. When used in the context of throwing, Hunter's Mark will, like Tavern Brawler, act as a DRS. By the way, this is contrary to when you're using a bow or a weapon, and it will not. Anyway, once you add in Hunter's Mark, things get a bit more confusing. We now see 3 separate damage sources, 2 of which are DRS, and there are 3 pairs of generic damage riders. If you think about it, this damage breakdown is kind of analogous to a tree. In fact, we can actually visualize this exact combat log using a tree diagram. I think this now paints a much clearer picture of what's happening here. So, to recap, the javelin is the initial damage source, then there are 4 damage riders coming from that damage source. 2 of the riders are generic, it's the 2 rings in this case, but the other 2 are DRS. And then from the 2 DRS, we get 2 additional sets of generic damage riders, so in total we have 3 sources and 3 sets of riders. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that these interactions are a little bit messy, and they're much easier to visualize if you were to imagine them as a big tree. Of course, for the example I just used, you obviously don't need a tree. If you just read the combat log for long enough, it's pretty clear what's going on. But now, let's consider what were to happen if instead of using a simple 2-item example character, we were to use a character which is actually about to hit their full build, and has at least 1 turn of setup in combat before it begins to deal damage. First, we need to introduce our key players. I will be using the following generic damage riders: Psionic Overload, Ring of Flinging, Callous Glow Ring, Rhapsody, and Arcane Charge. I will also be using the following DRS, or Damage Rider sources: Sneak Attack, Skullduggery Attack, Tavern Brawler, Falara Louvre, Hunter's Mark, and finally we get to the star item of this whole build, which happens to be the single dumbest looking item in the entire game, the Lightning Jabber. Seriously, this thing is just a weaponized lobster claw. I have no idea who thought it would be okay to make this one of the strongest items in the entire game. Anyway, the link in the description contains more information about the build used and how to get each of the buffs, items, and abilities used in this test.
Taking position.
Okay, I see. Okay, so, alright, so it's, okay, there's more. Okay, we're still scrolling here. Looks like, oh, okay, there's still more. Okay, yep. Oh, okay, here we go, we found the top. So, what the fuck just happened there? I think that the best way to try and visualize what ungodly chain of events just occurred there to give us that combat log would be to recreate the same steps, but this time instead of being in-game, we're going to do it using a damage tree. Essentially, instead of actually doing the damage, we're going to visualize what the damage looks like, which I think will help to understand exactly what's going on behind the scenes here. We're going to start off by throwing the Lightning Jabber, aka our weaponized Lobster Claw, and this is going to act as our initial damage source, or the root of the tree. The first DRS that we're going to encounter is going to be Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack will only happen on the first throw of each turn, but is a particularly potent one. So it's going to proc Stalker Gloves, aka Skulldaggery Attack, and Falara Louve. And then Stalker Gloves is going to also proc another instance of Falara Louve, and all 4 of these over here are DRS, so there's 4 different DRS at play here. Now each DRS is a damage source, which means it's going to proc its own set of these 5 generic damage riders. Basically, each 5 of these are riding on any damage source, and we have 4 different damage sources happening here. So from the Sneak Attack alone, even though it's only once per turn, we are getting a total of 4 sets of these 5 riders. Okay, so if we continue to expand the damage tree, the next major DRS we should encounter is going to be the 1d4 lightning from Lightning Jabber. This will proc Falara Louve, so we get 2 different DRS, 2 different damage sources, and therefore 2 different sets of generic damage riders. Hunter's Mark, when used with a throwable weapon, is going to behave in the exact same way. So we get Falara Louve, and then we get the 2 generic sets of damage riders. Tavern Brawler is definitely a DRS, but I can't for the life of me figure out why it doesn't proc Falara Louve. Nonetheless, it's a DRS damage source, therefore it will be getting its own set of generic damage riders. Finally, we get the set of generic damage riders from the initial Jabber throw, plus the initial Falara Louve proc, which will have its own set of generic damage riders. Let's take a look at the completed damage tree here, and see what we can conclude. So first of all, this set of riders on the far left is the only set in this entire tree which is working in accordance with D&D rules. The other 10, and there are 11 in total on here, are all coming from DRS in one way or another. And funny enough, half of them are coming from Falara Louve, which, I mean, this is just hilarious, but regardless. You can also conclude that the 11 total sets are only going to be on the first attack of each turn. Each subsequent attack will be losing 4 different DRS from Sneak Attack and therefore 4 different sets, so you'll be seeing a total of 7 of these on all the subsequent attacks. The final point I want to make on this example is just going to be how much damage are we actually gaining if we calculate how many 11 of these is worth. So this is actually a pretty easy calculation to do. Ring of Flinging and Psionic Overload are both a 1d4. So with 11 per turn, we are getting a 22d4 from these two. Then Arcane Charge is just going to be adding your proficiency bonus, which is going to be +4 at level 12. Rhapsody will be adding +3, and then the ring, Callous Glow Ring, will be adding +2. So these together are adding +9. So we are getting 99 plus 22d4. And that's just, that's literally just on the first attack of each turn. I'd like to end the video by pointing out the fact that the example build used in this video is just that. It's an example build. It's not a complete build, it's not a particularly good build, it isn't even a good build when it comes to using damage riders, it just isn't really a complete build at all. It's a bunch of components meshed together for one purpose, to create a complex combat log so I could visualize and then demonstrate the exact interactions going on between DRS and generic damage riders. So in essence, my hope is that what you got out of this video is not what you consider to be a powerful TB throw build, because it isn't a powerful TB throw build, it's just an okay TB throw build. But instead, you understand the fundamental interaction going on between a DRS and a generic damage rider, and you can now take it and either make your own builds or at least understand what other people's builds are actually doing. That's it. Have a good day.